So whenever you guys are ready, you can start. All the best and good luck.
Assalamualaikum and a very good morning to Mr. E. I am Sophia Hanis.
I'm Latina.
And I'm Nur Ain Atira binti Muhammad Suhaili.
So we will be presenting our findings on our chosen topics, which are Addie and white space clean design. So I will first start the presentation with Addie model. So for first timers who have heard of Addie model, might think that Addie model is being named after the creator of this model. But what Addie model actually is that it consists of 5 different phases, which are analyze, design, development, implementation, and evaluation phase. So what Addie model actually is a generic model that has systematic approaches to the process of designing instruction, and it provides a regular framework to ensure that end products that will be produced are efficient and effective. So other than that, Addie model is work as a flexible guideline for building effective training and performance support tools for many instruction designers and training developers. And lastly, Addie model is deemed as dynamic and practical, has focused attention to details, and each stage are clearly defined, that it facilitates the implementation of many effective training tools. So let's move on to the first stage of the Addie model, which is the analyze model, where designers and developers will establish specifications and requirements. Designers will establish specifications and requirements where they will gather information from various resources, and they will identify the useful variables that are later the next stages, which is the design stage. For instance, for a web instructional designers, they will gather information and data on their target audience. And the second stage, which is the design stage, this is when the designers and developers will assemble information and analysis to determine the goals, objectives, tools, strategies, and many others that will be later carried out in the next phases. So for instance, the web instructional designers just now, they will eliminate all the information that they have gathered before in the first stage, and then they will confirm on the useful variables that will be used in the next stage, which is the development stage. So that is all from me. I will pass the presentation to my other partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. So I'm Ain. So I'm going to talk about the next 3 processes, which are the development process, implementation process, and the evaluation process. So for the third process, which is the development process, this is where the data collected in the previous processes are used to develop the content. So what do? So basically, there are 3 important steps or 3 important tasks that they do in this process, which is they create the material or the content, they carry out tasks, and then they carry out the formative evaluation of the product. So how are they going to execute this? So mainly, the website developers will integrate the technologies for their content to be assembled into the final format, which look exactly like how the end product will be. And then they also finalize about the graphics and as well as debugging, if there are any. And by the end of this process, the prototype is ready to be launched. And then for the 4th step, which is the implementation step or process, this is where the design content or the prototype developed will be executed and delivered to the users. In this process, the developers need to constantly design and redesign as to enhance their product so that the users will have a maximum experience of the prototype release via the selected mediums planned during the development process. Same as before, evaluation is then being carried out. And then for the last step of process, which is the evaluation process, this is where the quality and effectiveness of the product is evaluated. The designer will ensure that the problem arises during the implementation process are being addressed during the evaluation process, and then they will ensure whether the desired objectives are met. So basically, there are two types of evaluation that they usually carry out, which are the formative evaluation and then the summative evaluation. The formative evaluation is usually done prior the implementation process. Meanwhile, the summative evaluation is done after the implementation process. Yeah. So how are they going to evaluate actually? So basically, they have choices, but they usually will distribute the feedback forms, or they make a minor meeting with their group, with their target group, before releasing the finalized and well-executed product to the public, taking consideration of the evaluation in the implementation process take place. So I guess that's it. I'll pass to Kamali.
Hello, can you all hear me? Okay, so moving on to white space and clean design. Okay, so first of all, let's look at the pictures that I've provided. So the similarities that we have between the two pictures, the first and second picture, is that both pictures have white space. Okay, so what is white space? White space is technically an area in a design of a page that's left blank or white. So the term white space does not necessarily mean that it has to be white, but it means that it has to be plain or solid, okay? But it can be colored. And this design technique helps separate paragraphs of text and graphics. So when we're looking at these white spaces, what we can see that let's look at the first example first. All right. So we can see like a cup in the middle. That's the object. And the background also looks like faces. All right. So this technique, white space techniques, helps to separate between the object and also the background. So it creates more readability. All right, so the types of white space, there are a lot of types actually, but I'm going to touch on the active and passive white space. So the first picture is an example of a passive white space in which the product or the object drawn is actually left empty, but the background is instead colored. All right, so the next one, the photo on the bottom right is an active white space in which the product or the object drawn is colored while the surrounding is actually left empty. All right, so what are the uses of white space? So moving on to the next slide, when we look at all these companies like these logos, Pinterest, Facebook, and also Instagram, they all have white spaces in their logos, all right? And this particular space really has their own functions. And the first one is to balance the layout. All right, so when we're talking about balancing the layout, how this balances in between the object and also the background is that the reason why is that it is visually received and understood better compared to when you are creating a logo that's cluttered and has a lot of objects in there. So the psychological trick behind this is that it improves readability. All right, so the more space you have, the easier it is to read. So looking back to the Facebook logo, the more space it has on the background, the more easier it is to read the F letter. All right, so and it creates a certain balance in between the output, making it easier to consume. The next function is to emphasize on objects. And of course, when we are creating a good white space, it's really highly anticipated, or it's highly recommended that you use white borders or any type of borders so that it can attract attention of what is inside an object or a picture. And making use of white space is in this situation is actually to emphasize on the objects or to put focus on the object that you want to introduce in the middle of the logos. All right. So let's look at the Pinterest logo. So when we look at this logo, what we see first is not the background. We see the letter P first. Okay. So due to the contrast between the white and red color and also the use of white space, and this is a form of negative white space. And the third function is to appear minimal, because a lot of people really love minimalistic styles, and let's be honest, how many of us really just go to Pinterest to find like minimalist interior design? It is basically because it's better received by people, because the term minimal is another term of being pretty, or it's really a design that is simple but it's also deemed as classy. All right. So this is the marketing that Apple uses. Their website is plainly simple. It's basically all white. Uh, the only things that are colored are the products, their phones, their airports, and all that, and also the writings, because it creates a minimalistic design that's better received and also is a form, a psychological trick of minimalism is equivalent to um, how do I say? Uh, is equivalent to something that is classy. All right. So and also a study has shown that plain colors like white is using plain colors is actually a good thing, because it actually improves our memory. And when we have a lot of plain backgrounds, it actually makes us remember things quicker compared to something that's really cluttered and all over the place, because it creates more focus and more emphasis on the objects. All right, so that's basically from me. So that's it from us. Thank you.
All right, just a sec now.